The greatest of all Israeli musicians is Arik Einstein, the Israeli Paul Simon. Einstein's career spanned over 50 years. His songs and his popularity span generations, and unique for any artist, seem to break through ethnic and even to a point religious differences in Israel. After he passed away in 2013, then Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said, "His songs accompanied us at all the stations of our lives, in our loves and disappointments, our ups and downs." Eulogies after his death called him the soundtrack of a nation. You likely know some of his music. Uf Gozal is a beautiful song which uses the metaphor of young chicks leaving a nest to connect to parents' angst and anxiety of children heading off to forge their own paths, filled with life's burdens and blessings. It's so good to have you back home, though written in 1972, became an anthem from Gilad Shalit's return from captivity in 2012. It captures the spirit of Israel as one family welcoming back a lost brother and a son. One of his less famous songs, which I actually hadn't heard until a few weeks ago, is not about Jerusalem or Haifa or Tel Aviv, the city in which he was born in 1939, but rather it's about San Francisco. Here it is.
יושב בסן פרנסיסקו על המים, שוטף את העיניים בכחול ובירוק, יפה בסן פרנסיסקו על המים, אז איך זה שאני מרגיש רחוק.
Anyone want to guess what year around it was written? 76, good guess. This 1979 song was written on one of Arik Einstein's visits to the Bay Area, and it portrays the longing for home in Israel, especially when far away. Juxtaposed with many of his songs about frustrations with his country, this one shows the deep and complex relationship both Einstein and Israel, and Israelis in general, have with their country. It is no wonder that San Francisco on the Water, the name of that song, has become the unofficial anthem of expat Israelis in the San Francisco Bay Area. Here's the translation. I'm here in San Francisco on the water again. I feast my eyes in blue and green all day. It's cool in San Francisco on the water, so how come I still feel so far away? I'm looking at the boats with all the geese around, the Golden Bridge is gorgeous, just like in a movie. I wish you could be here to show you around the town. I know that you would want to stay and say it's groovy. But what do you know? All of a sudden, all I want to be is to be home. Back to Cafe Kassit, to have a laugh with Moish and Hatzkel. Give me a piece of the Tabor. Give me a piece of the Kinneret. I just love to fall in love with good old Eretz Yisrael. So warm, my little Eretz. I went from San Francisco to Tel Aviv last month. I hadn't visited since 2018, the place where I lived on a gap year between high school and college, and where I studied as a first-year rabbinical student. And while I often yearn for Israel, the slopes of the Hermon, the coffee shops of Tel Aviv, Shabbat in Jerusalem, this time I didn't go alone. Rather, I staffed a honeymoon Israel trip. That's right, I got to go on honeymoons with 15 Bay Area newlywed couples, along with our Israeli guide and an HMI staff member. A rabbi on your honeymoon, doesn't that sound romantic? We journeyed through winding alleyways of Yafo and explored the mystical city of Sfat, visited the holy sites of Jerusalem, and delighted in the start of summer in Tel Aviv. We hiked Masada and floated in the Dead Sea. We visited Yad Vashem, the enduring memorial to the horrors of the Holocaust, and toured through the Golan Heights, where we could see Syria, the site of so much recent misery and tragedy in the not-so-far-away distance. Most importantly, I encountered a community of young couples who were willing to risk group travel, rising COVID numbers, and intense and intimate moments filled with vulnerability in an effort to ask big questions, the ones that musicians and artists have been pondering over for centuries. We went to the tourist sites, but we weren't tourists. Seekers, explorers, journeyers, adventurers, pilgrims. As my teacher, Rabbi Larry Hoffman, says, tourism is the wrong word for what Jews do when they go to Israel. Rather, pilgrims come because being in this place is part of who they are, a necessary segment in the story of their lives. If they are on a journey, not to leave home, but to come home to a deeper place in their soul, then they are pilgrims. But this pilgrimage actually wasn't really about Israel. And perhaps, ironically, I was on staff for these 10 days not because of anything having to do with our sacred Holy Land, but because of the relevance to my role at Beth Am. I spend so much of my time thinking about community for young American Jews. The goal of the Honeymoon Israel program is to help couples create community with deep and meaningful connections to Jewish life and the Jewish people, meaningful connections to the Jewish life and the Jewish people. And our trip was a mosaic of the Jewish world. Born Jews, non-Jews, Jews by choice, straight couples, gay couples, Jews with roots in the former Soviet Union, including some born in Ukraine, a few with Israeli parents, many who had never ever been to a synagogue. The couples themselves were of various backgrounds: Ukrainians, Bangladeshis, Puerto Ricans, Mexicans, Serbians, Jamaicans, Filipinos, Israelis, Australians, and even one who had a bar mitzvah at Beth Am with Cantor Greenwald. Many had a partner where one was born Jewish and one was born into another faith tradition, though no longer engaged in its theology or practice. Some had a partner where one was born Jewish and one became Jewish by choice. Some had a partner where one was born Jewish and one was actively and intentionally pursuing another faith. Only a few were couples where each partner was of Jewish heritage, and even those couples had upbringings distinct from one another. What they all shared in common was that each couple was trying to figure it out. How do we do this thing called Judaism? What does a Jewish home look like? How do we raise Jewish children? Do we even want children? How do we deal with these societal, familial, and religious pressures? Many of these couples came on the trip despite previous negative experience with the organized Jewish world. They felt shunned or unwelcomed or marginalized in establishment communities. They felt uncomfortable in traditional Jewish settings, not sure if the places we feel are so warm and welcoming were right for them. They felt loneliness and lack of friends. Synagogues are too far away. The cost is too expensive. The programming is too dry. I feel inadequate in my Jewish knowledge or in my commitment to Israel. The timing is bad. Dating a non-Jewish man or woman makes entering a synagogue uncomfortable, either because the community is not welcoming or because there is an internal perception that inner dating is frowned upon. People aren't friendly. Synagogues are boring. The choices that these couples are making isn't whether they should go to Eitz Chaim or Beth Am or Kol Emet. Those are the same places to them. The big choice that's being made is whether the Jewish experiment involves them. Each of these couples, firm in their relationship with their partner, is seeking real community where they can be their whole selves on their own terms. The words of the great religious sociologist Diana Butler Bass echoed in my mind. If we think of belonging only as a membership in a club, organization, or church, we miss the point. Belonging is the risk to move beyond the world we know, to venture out on pilgrimage, to accept exile, and it is the risk of being with companions on that journey. God, a spouse, friends, children, mentors, teachers, people who came from the same place we did, people who came from entirely different places, saints and sinners of all sorts, those known to us and those unknown, our secret longings, questions, and fears. While it was a wonderful trip, it was not an easy trip for me. It certainly was harder on Aaron for obvious reasons. But my 10 days were filled with personal angst, which never quite settled next to my plate of hummus. How do I feel about couples who actively practice more than one religion? How do I feel about young Jews who are likely to work on Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur? As a liberal Zionist, how do I respond to people who are unsure of the need for modern Israel? As a synagogue rabbi, how do I envision a community where synagogue relevance is slipping? As a rabbi who sees himself and my Beth Am colleagues as exceptionally welcoming and open and non-judgmental, how do I handle that they may see me very differently? Organizationally, I wonder about our communal angst too. Does our use of Hebrew or traditional Jewish in-speak serve as a barrier to engagement? Are we too focused on our incredible campus to meet young Jewish families where they are? These couples were well more apt to live in Redwood City or Santa Clara than Palo Alto, Los Altos, or Menlo Park. Do we exercise our intellectual muscles at the expense of our spiritual ones? How do we respond to the exorbitant cost of living here to meet the needs of all of our community members? These are questions to be consumed and debated. Beth Am needs to be asking them openly and often. We also need to prepare ourselves to be a little shocked by the answers. To do this well, to be the belonging community of 21st century Judaism, likely will require a time and a financial commitment that might not necessarily translate into future membership at Beth Am. However, I, for one, am convinced it will have a positive impact on Jewish connections in the long run. One couple that went on an HMI trip I staffed a few years ago, before the pandemic, said, "We thought we were going on a honeymoon trip. Well, we were wrong. What we actually signed up for was much, much more than we could have ever expected. We went on a trip that filled our heads with incredibly rich history, our bellies full of fantastic food and wine, and our hearts with love, life, and culture. We have a renewed, refreshed, and revamped understanding of what it means to have a Jewish home and a Jewish life." You might know Arik Einstein's most famous song, Ani V'Ata. We sometimes sing it at Beth Am, and it's a classic at Jewish summer camps around the world. It's a beautiful and optimistic song about the desire to change the world. It's so iconic that it's even in our prayer book. Ani V'Ata Nishaneh et ha'olam. You and I can change the world. Together, you and I can change the world. It also displays a loving naivete that says, why not? We can do this. Why not ask big questions about identity and meaning in Judaism? Why not push our institutions to be bolder and better and different? Why not bring strange couples to Israel for 10 days? We can do this. Shabbat Shalom.